The sharp, metallic scent of iodine and sterile hospital bleach still clung stubbornly to my faded blue scrubs as I turned the brass key in the lock of my modest suburban home. My bones ached with the heavy, deep-seated exhaustion that only a 12-hour trauma shift in the ER could produce. To the outside world, to my colleagues, and especially to my husband's family, I was just a tired, middle-class nurse struggling to balance motherhood and a demanding job. They didn't know about the offshore accounts. They didn't know about the Cayman Island trusts, or the real estate holding company, Vanguard Pinnacle, that practically owned half the commercial skyline of the city. As I pushed the door open, my smartwatch vibrated with a silent notification. Wire transfer successful, $2,450,000 USD from Vanguard Pinnacle to personal private wealth account. I quietly swiped it away. I didn't care about the millions right now. I just wanted to see my 5-year-old son, Leo. I had been planning his first official haircut for months, carefully researching a boutique pediatric barber. Eager to document the milestone, I had missed so many others to pay my dues in the medical field. The moment I stepped into the living room, the heavy silence of the house was shattered by a sharp, condescending click of a porcelain teacup hitting a glass coaster. My mother-in-law, Beatrice, was sitting on my thrifted linen sofa. She was draped in a garish, overtly branded $4,200 Gucci silk blouse and a pair of oversized Prada sunglasses pushed up into her heavily highlighted hair. But my eyes didn't linger on her ostentatious display of wealth that was, ironically, funded entirely by the allowance my husband gave her from an account I secretly replenished. My eyes locked onto the floor. Scattered across the oak floorboards were soft, golden curls. Leo's curls. I looked up. Leo was sitting on a kitchen stool, his head shaved down to the scalp in a harsh, uneven buzz cut. The delicate, innocent frame of his face was completely exposed, a cheap pair of electric clippers resting ominously on the quartz kitchen island beside him. The milestone I had begged to be a part of, the one thing I asked to be saved for me, was lying in clumps on the floor. "Don't stand there gaping like a fish out of water." Beatrice's voice sliced through the room, laced with an aristocratic sneer that she had perfected over decades of pretending to be old money. She crossed her legs, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet. He looked like a feral street urchin. "I have the annual charity gala at the Sterling Country Club this weekend, and I couldn't possibly have my grandson walking around looking like he belongs in a trailer park." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Unlike the exhausted, easily manipulated daughter-in-law she thought I was, I felt my heart rate steady. My emotional baseline flattened into a cold, absolute zero. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet as I slowly unbuttoned my cheap fleece jacket, the rough fabric sliding against my skin. "I specifically asked you to leave his hair alone, Beatrice," I said. My voice was dangerously quiet, barely above a whisper, yet it echoed off the walls. I walked over to the kitchen island, picking up a stray golden curl. It felt weightless between my fingertips. Beatrice let out a theatrical sigh, rolling her eyes as if dealing with an unruly servant. "Oh, please. Spare me the working-class mother guilt trip. You are always at that wretched hospital, emptying bedpans and playing martyr. Someone had to step in and act like a proper parent. You choose your miserable little ER job over your family every single day." She stood up, smoothing down her designer skirt. "Besides, my son deserves a wife who is actually present, not some tired wage slave who smells like sickness. You should be on your knees thanking me for maintaining the standards of this family." Standards of this family. The sheer, unadulterated irony of her words tasted like ash in the air. Beatrice prided herself on her elite status. She lived in a sprawling, 4,000-square-foot luxury penthouse at the Azure Towers, boasting to her high society friends that her successful son had bought it for her. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that Azure Towers was owned by a subsidiary shell corporation. A corporation where I sat as the sole majority shareholder. The $15,000 monthly rent she thought her son was paying was actually a quiet, untraceable write-off I approved every month out of pity. I took a slow, deliberate sip of cold water from a glass on the counter. The ice clinked softly against the rim. I let the silence stretch, watching her smirk falter for a fraction of a second. She thrived on dramatic reactions. She wanted me to yell, to cry, so she could play the victim and tell my husband how unstable I was. But I wasn't going to give her a screaming match. I was going to give her financial ruin. "You're right, Beatrice," I said, my tone as smooth and impenetrable as polished obsidian. I do work long hours. And I suppose a buzzcut is efficient. She blinked, clearly thrown off balance by my lack of hysteria. Well, I'm glad you're finally seeing reason. Now, be a dear and sweep this mess up before my son gets home. I need to get back to my penthouse. I have a massage therapist coming at 4. Of course, I replied, a chilling, imperceptible smile touching the corner of my lips. My hand slid into my scrub pocket, my fingers brushing against the cold, hard edge of my smartphone. The very device that held the digital keys to her entire existence. Have a safe drive back to the Azure Towers, Beatrice. Enjoy the penthouse. As she strutted out the front door, the sharp clack-clack of her Jimmy Choo heels echoing down the driveway, I looked down at the clumps of hair again. The trap was set. She had crossed the one boundary I had explicitly drawn. Now, the mask was coming off. The heavy oak front door clicked open precisely 38 minutes after Beatrice's departure. My husband, Mark, walked in, carelessly tossing his leather briefcase onto the entryway bench and loosening his silk tie. He looked exhausted from another day at his mid-level corporate firm, a job he was incredibly proud of. I loved Mark, I truly did, but his glaring blind spot when it came to his mother's toxic elitism was a flaw I could no longer subsidize. "Hey, honey, I'm home," Mark called out, walking into the kitchen. His eyes landed on Leo first, who was happily eating a bowl of apple slices, completely oblivious to the war that had just been declared over his head. Mark stopped dead in his tracks. The color drained from his face as he stared at the harsh, military-style buzzcut that had replaced our son's soft, golden curls. What happened to his hair? We had an appointment at the boutique barber next Tuesday. I remained seated at the quartz island, my posture perfectly straight. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply slid the cheap electric clippers across the counter toward him. The plastic casing made a hollow scraping sound against the stone. "Your mother decided that my schedule at the hospital made me an unfit parent," I stated, my voice devoid of any emotional fluctuation. She brought these clippers and shaved his head because, according to her, he looked like a feral street urchin who didn't belong at her country club gala. Mark ran a hand over his face, a deep sigh escaping his lips. "Damn it, Mom," he muttered. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and misplaced rationalization. "Look, she crossed a line. I agree. It's a huge boundary violation. But you know how she is. She's obsessed with appearances. She probably just thought she was helping out since you've been working so much overtime lately." "Helping," I repeated, the word tasting like rust. Before I could dissect his weak defense, my phone illuminated on the counter. The screen flooded with notifications from the Sterling family group chat. The trap I had anticipated was already springing. Beatrice hadn't just gone home, she had launched a preemptive strike, painting herself as the victimized grandmother to the rest of the family. I tapped the screen, opening the messages. Chloe, my sister-in-law who funded her designer handbag addiction through Beatrice's generosity, was the first to attack. "I can't believe you yelled at Mom over a stupid haircut. She's doing you a favor by watching Leo while you're busy playing nurse. You should be grateful she cares about his appearance." Then came Uncle Richard, the family's self-appointed patriarch who drove a leased BMW he could barely afford. "Beatrice is a woman of high society. She knows what is appropriate for a Sterling. You overreacted. An apology is expected." Mark glanced at my screen, wincing as the messages poured in. "They're blowing up my phone, too," he admitted, looking defeated. "They're calling you cold and selfish. Just let it go for now, okay? Let's not start a world war over hair. It will grow back. Banning her from the house is too much. She's my mother, and she lives alone in that huge Azure Towers penthouse. She needs us." I looked at Mark. He genuinely believed his mother was a fragile, wealthy dowager who needed his protection. He genuinely believed the illusion. "You're right, Mark," I said smoothly, leaning back in my chair. "Hair grows back. Let's not start a screaming match over it. I won't argue with her or your sister." Mark exhaled a massive breath of relief, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Thank you. I knew you'd be the bigger person. You're the best." He leaned down, kissed the top of my head, and walked toward the hallway to change his clothes. He didn't see the glacial, calculating look that settled over my features the second he turned his back. I wasn't going to start a screaming match. Screaming was for people who lacked leverage. I picked up my smartphone, my thumb resting lightly on the biometric scanner. A tiny green light flashed, and the screen transitioned from my mundane personal wallpaper to the encrypted, dual-factor authentication gateway of Vanguard Pinnacle Holdings. The dark interface loaded silently. I navigated through the labyrinth of corporate structures, bypassing the Cayman Island trust accounts and the commercial real estate portfolios, diving straight into the residential subsidiary that owned Azure Towers. The glowing numbers on the screen reflected an empire worth hundreds of millions, built brick by brick with my own hands before I ever met Mark, hidden away to ensure I was loved for me, not my net worth. I typed in the search bar, Penthouse 4A, Beatrice Sterling. The digital lease agreement materialized on the screen. It was a month-to-month courtesy lease, heavily subsidized by a corporate grant that I personally approved every year. The rent she supposedly paid Mark was a fraction of the market value, a charade designed to protect her fragile ego. My finger hovered over the Manage Lease button. Beatrice wanted to play games about who had the right to control my family's image. She wanted to exert her imaginary high society power over a lowly ER nurse. It was time she learned the fundamental rule of real estate and power. The landlord always wins. I didn't need to argue with my in-laws. I didn't need to defend my career. All I needed was one legally binding document. I selected the drop-down menu, my eyes scanning the options with surgical precision. Terminate lease agreement. Reason: immediate revocation of corporate subsidy. Notice period: 72 hours. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now, I just had to wait for the jaws to snap shut. The crystal chandeliers of the Sterling Country Club cast a fractured, prismatic light over the grand ballroom. It was Saturday evening, the night of Beatrice's highly anticipated annual charity gala. The air was thick with the scent of roasted duck, white truffles, and an overwhelming mixture of Tom Ford and Chanel perfumes. A live string quartet played a melancholy rendition of Vivaldi in the corner, entirely ignored by the 300 guests who were too busy networking and admiring each other's custom-tailored tuxedos and diamond necklaces. I arrived exactly 45 minutes late. I wore a simple, unbranded black sheath dress I had purchased off the rack 3 years ago, paired with sensible black flats. I wore no jewelry, my face free of the heavy, contoured makeup that the other women sported. To the untrained eye, I looked like a lost assistant. To those who truly understood wealth, I was a blank canvas, a woman who didn't need to wear her net worth on her sleeve because she owned the vault. I found my family holding court near the ice sculpture. Beatrice was in her element, swathed in a sequined emerald gown, holding a flute of vintage Dom Perignon. Chloe was beside her, laughing loudly at a joke made by Uncle Richard. And there, standing awkwardly in a miniature tuxedo, was my son, Leo. His harsh buzz cut looked even more jarring under the brilliant chandelier lights. A glaring, ugly reminder of Beatrice's control. When Beatrice spotted me, her smile tightened into a thin, predatory line. She excused herself from her wealthy friends and glided over, her eyes raking over my outfit with poorly concealed disgust. "I'm surprised you showed up," Beatrice murmured, keeping her voice low so as not to cause a scene. She took a delicate sip of her champagne. "I assumed you would be picking up an extra shift at the hospital to pay for that tragic dress. You look like you're attending a funeral, not the social event of the season." "I'm attending a conclusion, Beatrice," I replied, my voice a calm, flat line, and black seemed appropriate. She rolled her eyes, turning to Mark, who had just walked up with a fresh scotch. "Mark, please tell your wife to stop being so melodramatic. I have a headache as it is. Some incompetent clerical error at Azure Towers has been blowing up my email for the last 3 days. Spam, obviously. Something about a corporate subsidy revocation. I told the concierge to handle it, but they are being entirely useless." My pulse didn't quicken. My expression didn't change. I simply watched her. Suddenly, Beatrice's custom ringtone echoed loudly. She pulled her diamond-encrusted smartphone from her clutch, glaring at the caller ID. "It's the head concierge. Excuse me, I need to get this peasant in line." She answered the phone, her voice dripping with venom. "This is Beatrice Sterling. I told you to stop calling me about that spam email." She stopped. The blood visibly drained from her face, leaving her pale beneath her spray tan. The manicured hand holding the phone began to tremble. What do you mean, deactivated? My keycard is platinum. You cannot deactivate my elevator access. Movers? What movers? Tomorrow morning. Mark frowned, stepping closer. Mom? What's going on? They're saying my lease is terminated, Beatrice stammered, her voice pitching into a shrill octave of genuine panic. Several nearby guests turned their heads. They said the corporate subsidy was permanently revoked and I have 12 hours to vacate the penthouse before security escorts me out. That's impossible, Mark said, his corporate lawyer instincts kicking in. I pay your rent. I send $15,000 to the leasing office every single month. Give me the phone. Mark snatched the device from her hand. This is Mark Sterling. I am the tenant on record. Yes, I understand it's a subsidiary of Vanguard Pinnacle. I want to speak to the regional manager. Now, there was a heavy pause. I watched Mark's jaw clench. The string quartet seemed to fade into the background. What do you mean, you can't override it? Mark snapped, his voice rising. I am paying the market rate. I demand to speak to whoever authorized this eviction. Give me the name of the Vanguard property director. Another pause. Mark's face contorted in confusion. The CEO? Why would the CEO of Vanguard Pinnacle personally authorize an eviction notice for a single residential penthouse? That doesn't make any sense. Uncle Richard and Chloe had stopped laughing. The entire family circle was now staring at Mark in stunned silence. Beatrice looked like she was going to faint, her emerald gown suddenly looking like a cheap costume. Put them on speaker, I commanded softly. The absolute authority in my tone made Mark obey without thinking. He tapped the screen. The crisp, professional voice of the Azure Towers management director echoed from the phone. Mr. Sterling, as I explained, this wasn't an automated system error. The revocation of your mother's 80% rent subsidy, and the subsequent eviction, was a direct, manual override from the absolute top. I cannot help you. You will have to take it up with the majority shareholder. And who the hell is that? Beatrice shrieked, dropping all pretense of high society grace. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. The heels of my simple black flats made no sound on the marble floor. I looked directly into Beatrice's panicked, wide eyes. Vanguard Pinnacle Holdings, I stated. My voice slicing through the heavy air like a scalpel, is a privately owned asset management firm. Its portfolio includes commercial zoning, offshore trusts, and the entire residential block of Azure Towers. I reached into my cheap purse, pulling out a heavy, titanium black card, the ultra-exclusive Vanguard Founder's Key, the master override for the entire building. I dropped it on the cocktail table between us. It landed with a heavy, final thud. And I whispered, am the majority shareholder. Your lease is up, Beatrice. The titanium card sat on the glass cocktail table, reflecting the prismatic light of the chandelier above. For a long, agonizing moment, no one moved. The string quartet in the background seemed to play in a vacuum. Uncle Richard was the first to break the silence, letting out a forced, condescending chuckle. What is this? A joke? Did you buy a fake metal card online to win an argument, sweetheart? This is pathetic. Beatrice, let's call security and have her removed. I didn't look at Richard. He was insignificant. My eyes remained locked on Mark, who was staring at the heavy black card as if it were a live grenade. He slowly reached out, picking it up. His thumb brushed over the raised, engraved lettering, Vanguard Pinnacle Holdings, founder and CEO. Mark, Beatrice snapped, her voice trembling with an unnatural pitch. Throw that piece of garbage away. She's bluffing. She empties bedpans for a living. She drives a 6-year-old Honda. I drive a Honda because I don't need a depreciating asset to validate my self-worth, Beatrice, I said quietly. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen illuminated my face with a cold, pale light. I bypassed the standard lock screen, opening the encrypted Vanguard executive portal. I turned the screen toward Mark. Read it, I instructed. Mark's eyes darted across the digital dashboard. He saw the live ticker of the holding company's total assets, a number with so many zeros it made his breath hitch. He saw the subsidiary portfolio. And then, he saw the legal deed to the Azure Towers listing me, his wife, as the sole proprietor. This has your digital signature, Mark whispered, his voice cracking. He looked up at me, his face a mask of utter bewilderment, the corporate lawyer in him completely short-circuiting. The corporate structure, the LLCs, it all traces back to you. You own the building? I own the skyline, Mark, I corrected him gently. I tapped the screen, bringing up the specific ledger for penthouse 4A. And I own the reality your mother lives in. I turned my gaze back to Beatrice, whose spray-tanned face had turned a sickly shade of gray. The surrounding gala guests had stopped pretending to mingle. Dozens of eyes were now fixed on our circle, drawn by the palpable collapse of the Sterling family matriarch. You thought your son was paying your rent, I stated, my voice echoing clearly over the hushed whispers. You thought $15,000 a month bought you a 4,000-square-foot penthouse in the financial district with private fingerprint-secured elevator access. Beatrice swallowed hard, her manicured fingers clutching her designer clutch so tightly her knuckles were white. It does. That's the market rate. The market rate, I replied, perfectly articulating each syllable, is $75,000 a month. Mark's contribution barely covers the property tax and the high-tier HOA fees. The crystal champagne flute slipped from Beatrice's hand. It hit the marble floor, shattering into 100 glittering pieces. The sharp, violent sound of breaking glass echoed through the ballroom. I have been subsidizing your lavish, fake money lifestyle with a $60,000 corporate grant every single month for the last 4 years, I continued, unaffected by the shattered glass at my feet. I authorized the write-off because Mark loved you, and I wanted peace in my home. I bought you your elite status, Beatrice. Me, the exhausted wage slave you so thoroughly despise. No, Chloe gasped, stepping back, her hands flying to her mouth. That's impossible. Mom's allowance for us, the money for my boutique, comes directly from a Vanguard trust account that I replenish quarterly. I finished for her, not sparing my sister-in-law a single glance. The designer bags, the leased BMW Richard drives, the very country club membership we are currently standing in. All of it is underwritten by the woman you called a peasant 10 minutes ago. To prove my point, I opened the email client on my phone and forwarded the eviction notice directly to Beatrice's device. A second later, her phone pinged. She looked down, her eyes scanning the official Vanguard letterhead, my name clearly stamped at the bottom as the authorizing authority. Beatrice's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. The arrogant, untouchable high society matriarch was gone, replaced by a terrified, hollow shell of a woman realizing her entire existence was a house of cards. And I had just pulled the bottom card. You took my son's milestone, I said, my tone dropping to a chilling whisper that forced them all to lean in to hear me. You violated my boundaries because you thought I was a powerless, tired nurse. You thought my silence and my cheap scrubs meant submission. You thought you could humiliate me and face zero consequences because you viewed me as beneath you. I reached out, gently plucking my phone from Mark's trembling hand, leaving him holding only the heavy titanium card. I don't scream, Beatrice. I don't throw tantrums, I said, looking into her panicked, tear-filled eyes. I just cut the funding. Your eviction is permanent. You have exactly 12 hours to clear your things out of my building before my security team physically removes you from the premises. Enjoy the rest of the gala. The silence in the grand ballroom of the Sterling Country Club was absolute. The string quartet had completely stopped playing, the musicians staring wide-eyed at our fractured family circle. Beatrice, the once proud matriarch of high society, dropped to her knees right there on the polished marble floor. The emerald sequins of her designer gown scraped against the scattered shards of crystal from her broken champagne flute. The surrounding gala guests, previously whispering, were now dead silent, their expensive champagne forgotten. The sheer humiliation of being exposed in front of her high society peers was breaking Beatrice faster than the financial ruin itself. Suddenly, the crocodile tears began to flow. The same woman who had ruthlessly sheared my son's hair and mocked my 12-hour shifts was now weeping hysterically, grasping at the hem of my simple black dress. Please, Beatrice sobbed, her meticulously applied mascara running down her spray-tanned cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. Please, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it. I was just trying to help with Leo. You can't do this to me. I'll be homeless. I have nowhere to go. Please, I love you. You're the daughter I never had. I looked down at her. My heart rate remained steady, registering a calm 72 beats per minute. You don't love me, Beatrice, I stated, my voice as cold and sterile as an operating room. You love Vanguard Pinnacle. You love the $60,000 monthly subsidy. You love the prestige of a penthouse you never earned. Chloe pushed her way forward, her hands trembling as she clutched her heavily branded handbag. Listen, maybe Mom went too far, but you can't freeze the trust accounts. My boutique, my lease is up for renewal next week. I need that quarterly transfer. We're family, you can't just cut us off over a bad haircut. Uncle Richard nodded vigorously, his face pale. Exactly. It's just hair. We can apologize. There's no need to destroy our livelihoods. I turned my gaze to Chloe and Richard, the sheer audacity of their entitlement hanging heavily in the air. Your boutique, Chloe, has operated at a net loss of $42,000 for the past 3 fiscal quarters. I covered it out of charity. And Richard, your leased BMW is heavily past due on its financing. I am not destroying your livelihoods. I am simply removing the invisible safety net you took for granted while you mocked the woman holding it. I pulled my phone out one last time. With 3 deliberate taps on the encrypted Vanguard dashboard, I initiated a total freeze on the Sterling family secondary trust accounts. The screen flashed a bright, undeniable green. Authorization successful. Assets frozen. It's done, I announced quietly. The trust is dissolved. The penthouse lease is terminated. You are all financially independent as of this exact second. I suggest you learn how to budget. Mark swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He looked down at the titanium card in his hand, the symbol of an empire he never knew he was married to, and then at his mother, writhing on the floor. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a terrifying mix of awe, fear, and profound realization. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear to you, I didn't know. I know you didn't, Mark, I replied softly, my tone softening just a fraction for the man I married. But your blind compliance enabled their cruelty. You allowed them to disrespect the mother of your child because you were afraid to disturb their fake reality. You and I will have a long conversation about our future, and Leo's future, when we get home, tonight. I didn't wait for his response. I walked past the sobbing shell of my mother-in-law, my sensible black flats making no sound. I walked over to my 5-year-old son, who was quietly watching the spectacle. I picked Leo up, his small arms wrapping around my neck. I kissed his buzzed head, the bristly texture a stark reminder of why this all had to happen. As I walked out of the opulent ballroom, leaving the shattered remnants of the Sterling family behind me, the cool night air hit my face. I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I stepped into the back of my waiting, inconspicuous Honda, the engine purring to life. True power is never loud. It does not need to scream to establish dominance, nor does it require luxury brands to validate its worth. In a world obsessed with superficial aesthetics and the hollow echo of fabricated status, we often forget that the deepest strength lies in quiet endurance and unwavering boundaries. Wealth is merely a tool, a magnifying glass that eventually reveals the authentic core of human character. When we strip away the designer clothes, the penthouses, and the trust funds, we are left only with how we treat the vulnerable and the tired. Kindness should never be mistaken for weakness, and humility should never be interpreted as an invitation for abuse. The ultimate justice is not found in fiery vengeance, but in the cold, precise removal of one's presence and resources from those who only worship the gold, while brutally disrespecting the hands that mined it.